are richer. We have a lot more resources. We have all this technology in front of us and available to us. And somehow we are a lot more in pain.
I'm Heather Grish, and this is the Wisdom of the Body podcast. This podcast explores the idea of body intelligence as the real key to learning the knowledge of life, or what we call Ayurveda in the ancient language of Sanskrit. We do that by connecting with today's creative leaders and experts who will help you listen to your body, trust your gut, and live in deeper harmony with nature. Come join me as we unlock the golden door to clear, direct perception and become very deep listeners. You can find the Wisdom of the Body podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. You can also follow us by joining my email at heathergrish.com or on Instagram at heathergrish. I know you're going to love this podcast, so take a second right now to subscribe. Today, I'm here with Jovanka Ciares. She is the author of Reclaiming Wellness, an Ancient Wisdom for Your Healthy, Happy, and Beautiful Life. She's a certified wellness expert, integrative herbalist, nutrition educator, and coach, and she offers lectures and workshops in Spanish and English. Ciares studied nutrition with best-selling author T. Colin Campbell at his Center for Nutrition Studies in partnership with Cornell University, and she also studied herbalism and plant medicine with Tiarona Lodog, who's an MD, and she's a native of Puerto Rico and lives in Los Angeles. Thank you so much for being here today, Jovanka. I'm so excited to connect with you.
Thank you so much for having me, Heather. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's so great to connect with you through our publisher.
Yes, that's true. We have the same publisher and they've been incredible.
Yeah, I love so fun publishing a book, but I also know it's a grueling process and it's tiring and lots of headaches when you're editing, or at least for me. But your book just launched and I can't wait to hear all about it. I would love to start with just sort of what inspired you to write this particular book, because I know that especially those of us who like to write, we might have a couple books in us, but this particular one, what was so important for you to write this one?
Yeah. So once again, thank you so much for having me. And like you said, I had this book in me. I didn't even know I had it. At the beginning of the 2020 pandemic, I was like everybody else, inside my house, tethered to the little screen. And I started to see and hear all these stories and statistics about people that were struggling with COVID and comorbidities and preventable conditions that were exacerbating their experience with COVID. And I started to realize that a lot of this information, a lot of these preventative and or practices that will help you restore your balance have not been embraced by people that need it the most. So I created this educational initiative called the Reclaiming Wellness Initiative to provide classes, wellness and healthy living classes at low to no cost to people all over the country. And from there, this book kind of like came to be, and it's been an incredible labor of love.
Wow, that's really important, actually. I mean, I know because I practice Ayurveda and, we're not covered by insurance, and people are always, trying to figure out, well, how can I do this and like make enough money to do it in the United States? And it's so great that you've been able to figure out how to deliver the wellness services at a low cost. I mean, obviously our government seems to fund some things, but it doesn't seem to be enough. And what you said about the fact that with the people who were getting sick were the people who weren't accessing the wellness information, it's really tragic, right? I mean, we all want more wellness in our lives. I think even those of us who are in the wellness industry, right? Like we want more wellness, but I know we always have a particular audience in mind when we're writing a book. Sometimes it's even like a past version of ourselves when we're writing it. So who would you say this book is really for?
Yeah, the truth of the matter is that the people that seem to be struggling the most with the pandemic, not only getting very sick, but potentially dying, were people of color based on the numbers. And as a person of color, I am both Black and Latina. I started to realize that these practices that I am teaching, and I've been teaching for a decade now, I was not touching those people that sounded and looked like me. So certainly the very idea of that was a big catalyst. I started to also realize, okay, all these practices, all these beautiful wellness practices come from multicultural communities from around the world and have been practiced for thousands of years in some cases. And it was a little heartbreaking to me that I wasn't part of the solution. I wasn't going out there and accessing those people that I believe needed it the most. So that's the reason why I created the initiative. And the book speaks to everybody, but with a focus on those people of color that may feel like those practices are just for privileged people or for people that have a different socioeconomic background. And nothing could be farther from the truth. If you think about practices like Ayurveda or yoga, or even the use of plants as medicine, people from all over the world have been embracing them for thousands of years. And it's time that we reclaim our ancestral practices so that then we can also reclaim our natural state of wellness.
Yeah, it is really interesting how it does seem that the indigenous medicines from different regions all over the world are, those of us who got into wellness turn to in order to reconnect and truly understand what wellness means. I mean, I certainly experience, and I find it interesting that the indigenous or the traditional is sort of the alternative now, right?
Yeah, when it has been the exact opposite. If you look at the full history of humanity, we have been, including today in modern eras, we have been embracing what we know in the Western world as traditional or alternative. And it's really interesting, right? It's really funny that we now believe that this is just the stuff that we do when there's no other alternative. When in fact, if you go just as far as back as just maybe one or two generations, chances are the people in your family have been practicing some of these modalities to help them restore balance or maintain balance. So it's not just about preventing. It could very well be to help you treat and balance your body, your mind, and your soul until you can get back to homeostasis.
Yeah. And one of my teachers in Ayurveda school, I remember her saying that when you start to get the diseases of the rich, you have to eat the food of the poor.
She is wise. I want to meet her. It is so true. We have been walking away. I mean, this was part of my story too. I walked away from the natural foods and the way of living that caused me to stay healthy and moved on to the big city and started eating the way that people in rich countries ate, and my body fell apart. And you see that with millions and millions of people in the richest countries in the world.
Yeah, it's like, what is this connection? Why don't we get smarter and healthier when we get more money? Why doesn't that happen? Maybe everybody has to just go through this process. Maybe we get this, like, the tantalizing nature of having access to more things. And I don't know, because I feel like I went through that too. Although I also don't feel like I was, raised with any really deep knowledge of health, which is why I personally turned to an indigenous medicine to remember something that was probably lost for so many generations in my family, not just my generation. So now that so many people are trying to figure out how to be well, right? How do you define wellness for someone?
That's a good question, because I think if you ask 2 dozen people their definition of wellness, you'll get 2 dozen answers. And it's true. The truth of the matter is that it might mean different things for different people. Ayurveda, as you know, believes that every single one of us is a universe. Most alternative medicine traditions also believe that we are a combination of body, mind, and soul. And keeping a balance between those three parts of us is critical to maintain health. So to me, then wellness becomes the daily action, the practices that you engage with every single day to help you either restore balance when things get out of balance. And it's very normal for things to get out of balance, but it's the action to every day make decisions that will help me restore balance or maintain that balance if I feel absolutely well, with the understanding that most of us things happen in life, right? We get unbalanced, the time of the year, whatever is happening in front of us, our relationships, the way we eat will cause our bodies to stay out of balance. And those actions that we take in every day will then become the action of wellness, if you will.
Yeah. And the work that you've been doing, so it sounds like you had this big realization that you wanted to serve a community that wasn't accessing the information that would help them. And, you've said in the book that the modern wellness industry has a diversity and an inclusion problem. Can you tell a little bit more about that? Is that a big part of your driver to make that move?
Yeah, it's definitely a big driver. I am a person of color in the wellness industry, and it is changing. Don't get me wrong. Certainly, in the last 2 or 3 years since I started researching the book, I've seen a resurgence of more experts of color. But when I first started this journey, which was 15 years ago, I was very often the only person of color in yoga classes, for example, or in wellness conferences or in meditation classes. And at the time, it was like, well, I guess it's what's supposed to happen. And then eventually, when my body started to heal and I became so impassioned and in love with some of these practices, I realized that I was a little upset that this information wasn't available and accessible to everybody. So I started first just sitting in any soapbox I could find, just shouting to the world, there is this amazing world out there that we can tap into. And no, we don't have to wait until we have whatever our idea of perfection is. And in the book, I talk about this idea of decolonizing the mind, because sadly or not sadly, depending on who you talk to, these practices have been embraced by people that are relatively homogeneous, right? They are mostly white, mostly women, and relatively wealthy by society standards. And then we have created these ideas that these practices fall into the category of this vision of society. And then the rest of the world will say, well, I'm not in that group, so I'm not going to embrace them. And to me, it's a really sad realization. So I tell people all the time, let's find a way to decolonize our minds to begin with. Start by recognizing, no, we don't need to be perfect. We don't need to fit in this idea of what we see these practices as. We can create our own spaces or allow for openness in the existing spaces so that we can find our place within these practices with the understanding that they're going to be highly imperfect and that is okay.
So that's an incredible thing to do. And it's sort of like, you're in this wellness world, you're feeling like this kind of unique individual in this wellness world. And you're like, I need to be helping some people who aren't here right now.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of what happened?
That's exactly what happened. And I will be the first one to admit that in my practice, most of my clients looked very homogeneous as well. Because as you said, some of these alternative practices are not covered by insurance. And so not a lot of people can say, I'm going to pay out of pocket to go see an herbalist or see an Ayurvedic practitioner. So that was also part of the realization. I am not touching my people. I am not doing what I originally set out to do. Yes, I am making a difference, but not with all of the people I could be making a difference. And so I decided, if I could afford to actually spend several hours every week going out in the world and educating others, even before they could afford me, I wanted to do that. And that's how I started this initiative and the book.
Yeah, it's super important, especially I think when we're talking about racial differences, because I have a lot of friends that share medical content with me or like wellness content. And, some people have never even seen Black bodies, medical diagrams of Black bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So so many of the resources available are framed around white bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is something about the knowledge of our essence as being very important when trying to help someone heal.
Mm-hmm.
I'm familiar with the medical statistics from the Black community, higher maternal and infant mortality rates and stuff like that, because I work in the fertility space. And, I was an advisor for a woman doing a master's thesis on a program she was creating for Black pregnancy support, the prenatal support, which frankly all women need, but there really is a greater need for this in the Black community when you look at the statistics anyway. I mean, I can't speak from a first person position on that because I'm not Black that I'm aware of. But if you look at the statistics, you know that there's a need there. And so I may not be able to sort of relate to that on a direct level, but what I can understand is the feeling that a structure was created for someone else and didn't think about my unique needs in that structure.
Correct.
And that I may have tried to fit myself into that mold and suddenly realize like, oh, this was never meant for me. They don't really truly understand me. And that's why this doesn't feel right. And so I'm in like this paradigm shattering position. And that's why I don't feel supported and my body feels icky. And then it's like, once we all realize we're in that position and whatever system it's in, it's like, okay, I could decide that I'm going to leave that structure and just, try to find a better one that's going to fit me. Or I could, stay in there and try to like bust through the paradigm. And I don't really know which of those is harder to do.
Right. And in many cases, it might just mean that I would have to find or create the space like your colleague is doing for those bodies that have historically been disenfranchised and not welcomed in those spaces. But as practitioners, regardless of your background, we still have a lot of power. We can, because what you're doing is really beautiful. This awareness is the very first, probably most important step to recognize there has been historically harm done, either based on ignorance or omission, but there's been some harm done, and I want to be aware of it, accept it, listen to it, and then find solutions for it. And so for those of us who have a lot of resources, what can we do is one of the questions that we should be asking ourselves. What can we do? Does it mean if you're the owner of a yoga studio, perhaps you want to offer classes at no cost 1 day a week? Or for $5. I remember even in New York City, we had classes at like $5 a class, and they were packed with people interested. So the need and the desire and the excitement to try something new is definitely there. We as the owners of the space also could do more, and it's all about figuring out what that means for you.
Yeah, the decolonization thing has come up a lot in my circles because I studied Ayurveda, which is, has its own nuances of things because of, some cultural appropriation stuff. It was like we don't have a huge amount of Black and Latino population, I would say, in our community right now. But how do you think this idea of decolonizing, the colonization piece, like if our minds are becoming colonized, how does this happen to us?
Well, it happened many, many hundreds of years ago when what we know today as the dominant caste went all over the world and decided to just take over the forms of government, tell these people, well, your way of living is no longer valid. And it's the stuff that if you are uneducated or not modern enough, then you will practice that. But that is not for the modern era. So, just like any colony around the world try to stop or slow down these traditional practices, not just about wellness, but about almost everything else in societies around the world. India is a perfect example of people who wanted to be modernized, wanted to be more European, and decided to move away from practices like yoga, like Ayurveda, and many others. And now, many years later, after, decades after their independence movement, there's all of these practices are getting a resurgence, most likely because they are also getting excited and very popular in Western settings. And so now the people in India and other parts of Asia and the world are looking west, or I guess east, at us in the West and saying, okay, so if it's exciting for you, maybe, but this is mine, maybe I can just reclaim it. I can take it back. And so you're seeing a little bit of a resurgence where we are truly losing the battle is with the immigrant community in countries like the United States, Canada, and parts of Europe. Because those people do want to be assimilated, and they're having a harder time keeping these practices as part of their being. And that is really, really sad. And it's part of the work that I do, is to help people reclaim, no, this is part of your ancestry. This is a really beautiful thing. And we are recognizing it. Western modern science is seeing how amazing, it's giving us a confirmation of how amazing these practices is. Let's just reclaim them because we deserve them.
Yeah, the US is like always, prides itself in being this melting pot, right? And then, but everybody sort of melted into something where they lost their lineages. And then, along with losing the lineages, they lost the knowledge of the plants, the knowledge of the moon and the stars and all that stuff. And that's like, okay, we'll find it anywhere. Oh my God, who's still connected to this?
A lot of us are not.
Yeah. So if you think that, okay, if we can consciously and actively decolonize, right? Because it's like we have to understand how we've been. Well, actually, can you explain like what it even means to be colonized? I think you explained it in terms of like the sort of societal structures that have caused, tell me if I'm interpreting it correctly.
Yeah.
The societal structures that have caused us to think, believe things the way that we do.
From the point of view of the coloners, from the point of view of that dominant caste that came in and said, no, it is going to be our way of living, our structures, our society, our views, our politics, all of the things, we're going to literally put that over yours and hopefully help you forget forever your lineage and all of your practices, because we don't consider them valuable. So I want you to forget about them and also consider them not valuable enough. And I'll give you a perfect example for somebody like me, who I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. And Puerto Rico has been a colony for its entire history. It was first a colony of Spain, and it's been a colony of the United States for over 120 years. In Puerto Rico, I grew up eating from the earth. Like my neighbor's mango tree will, we will climb it and we will eat from the mango tree. And we had home cooked meals, and we were in touch with the forest and the oceans, and fresh air was everywhere. We just practiced all of this stuff unconsciously because it was part of being human. And as soon as I moved to the United States, I was like, I don't want to be that person anymore. I want to be a modern young woman. I want to live the way New Yorkers live. And I moved away from those practices, and I started eating the way young people in the United States eat. And of course, my body was like, what are you doing? And it rebelled against me. It was a blessing in disguise because my health conditions were not life-threatening. But imagine if you are an immigrant coming from anywhere in the world and trying to assimilate and moving away from the natural way that was intended for you to live and eat. And then 20, 30, 40 years later, that condition might not be an ulcer, it might not be prediabetes, it might be cancer, it might be, early onset Alzheimer's. And what a travesty, what a tragedy that is, that we are struggling with those highly preventable conditions. These conditions of the wealthy, like your teacher mentioned, we don't have to, right? We don't have to lose our grandparents, our elders, ourselves much earlier on than intended. We can be assimilated and also honor our lineage, our ancestry, and live the way our ancestors did for our own benefit.
Isn't that kind of whacked out that we could become more educated and then screw it all up? No, because I feel like the same. I mean, I don't know.
It's so true. It's like we moved away. We are richer. We have a lot more resources. We have all this technology in front of us and available to us. And somehow we are a lot more in pain. We are a lot more, sad and traumatized, and we don't live well. We are still living longer than our parents did. But the last 20, 30 years of our lives, we're in so much pain. And I am blessed that my SmackDown, as I call it, came to me early on in life, and it is my life's mission to tell anybody that wants to listen, you don't have to go into your 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s in pain. There's a lot that we can do today to help us live well for many decades to come.
Okay, so let's assume that we're also subject to further colonization if it's happened to us in the past. Like that it's a possibility that that could happen to us, once it's already happened. So how could we actively and consciously prevent that from happening?
That's a great question because it's hard, right? We have been indoctrinated sometimes for generations. So the very first thing that I tell people is let's start with the mind, right? Like we can recognize that perfection is a non-attainable goal. We are imperfect. Even the coloners are, even the dominant caste who have been telling us this way is the perfect way, they're also imperfect. So let's assume that we are highly imperfect. What does it mean for me to embrace some of these practices, even in the state that I am? No longer am I going to think, oh, I'm not going to do yoga until I lose those 30 pounds. Or I'm not going to worry about this other thing until I find a partner and I'm married and then I can learn how to cook. We can learn how to cook healthy together. No, what can I do today that's going to, in an imperfect way, help me embrace something? And then after that, and this is something I tell clients all the time, I need you to reclaim your time and your space. What does that look like? It might look really different to you than it does to me. Let's say that you are a mother of two with a full-time job and a partner and family that you need to take care of. Perhaps that means that you only have a Saturday to walk around your house and find a space that you know could be yours at certain times of the day or the week. It could be the bathroom. It could be a den. It could be the outside, patio, whatever it might be. And then after that, you want to reclaim some time, especially women, because we are natural givers. We are natural nurturers. And when you give a lot, we're very bad at receiving. We don't like it. We don't expect it. We are uncomfortable receiving it. And that is part of that colonizer mentality. So we need to understand that the role that we take as givers also involve receiving, because receiving is also an act of generosity from somebody else, right? Or from yourself. And then we're going to find that time to replenish and reclaim some of our energy and the stuff that we give out into the world. That might mean for you that you have to wake up 30 minutes earlier to go into the bathroom and listen to your favorite podcast or do some meditation or do some stretching or whatever it is that you need to do. Or perhaps you need to wait until the kids are in bed and the house is quiet to go into that bathroom and have a cry if that's what you need to have. So let's just start there. I think those 3 little steps will help us get there, at least to start.
Thank you so much. And do you have kids?
I do not.
Oh, okay. But you really truly understand the struggle of not being able to do stuff when you have kids. I'm like, yes, that's what I do. I have to get up 30 minutes. I have to get up 60 minutes earlier than my kids.
Because it is not only is all of the clients that I see are often mothers, but also it was the person that I had in my soul while I was writing the book. I was like, how can I make this information so easily digestible that regardless of whether or not all you have is 15 minutes of your time, you can find something to help you feel better and more connected with yourself at least once a day.
Yeah. I mean, I know a big part of my journey was going to, retreat centers and ashrams and, I lived by myself for a while. I had the luxury of living by myself to do a lot of my self-work. But it's no joke for people who have roommates or a partner or who don't have time, or even in the pandemic, right? Nobody could go to these places where you find that time and space to be able to do a lot of that deep work on yourself. So it's so important that people also can figure out how to build in these things, like you're saying, even if it doesn't seem like a big amount of time, it's a huge deal, even if it's just 15 minutes. So also in the wellness industry, it sounds like you've been kind of immersed also in the yoga industry, and the yoga industry is a big place where a lot of the racial, like a lot of the diversity and inclusion conversations come up, but also not just with race, but also with, you had previously mentioned kind of the weight thing earlier as well. And, because there's all the pictures on the cover of Yoga Journal or these skinny bitches. No. And I say that, right, kind of jokingly, because that's not even necessarily attractive to everybody, but somehow that became this like gold standard of health, is to be like super. Yeah. So the idea that by promoting certain looks more than others, or showing or displaying certain looks more than others, if you're a brand, right, that you're sort of saying, I don't know, like there's a lot of people that have claimed that that's, shaming in some way on the weight issue. So is the solution then to make sure that we have more different types of bodies being, and I know a lot of brands have done that, right, where they're trying to get more types of bodies shown in their media, right? And do you think that's enough, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely not. I think that first and foremost, and this is something you see in social media all the time, people telling you every time a brand makes a mistake, right? Like they miss the mark on something, whether it is related to race or religion or physical body or whatever it might be, is because the people in the room making decisions tend to also be very homogeneous, right? Like if you're trying to embrace and attract different demographics, different types, then you need to go into those rooms where decisions are made with either the mentality, the clarity about what those particular demographics need, want, and desire, but also ideally have those same people in those decision making rooms, right? What is the point of trying to be more inclusive and more diverse if when you're trying to make the decisions, everybody on the table is a white male? Like, you can only do so much when your experience is that experience of a white male. You're not going to have clarity about and the nuances and the idiosyncratic mindset needed to understand what it is to be in a heavy set Black woman's body, or a disabled young woman's body, or whatever it might be. There's a million different types, and we tend to see only one or two or maybe three types. So the decision making is where I would start. And if you cannot hire those people, then, on a long-term basis, then at the very least, as consultants, they should be hired so that you have a little bit of clarity. You can set a strategy, a proper strategy, and then execute on that strategy. And then you'll start noticing the differences in the magazines, in the ads, and in the practices, in the spaces as well.
Yeah. So I know there's some wellness professionals that listen to the podcast, and, obviously, people who are interested in fertility and stuff, but particularly for anyone who's a wellness professional, what advice would you have for them to move forward to inspire others without contributing? I mean, obviously we're all speaking to an audience, right? Then, and how do you recommend people move forward without like contributing to something like fat shaming or colonizing? Yeah. What do you have like some tips that you could?
Yeah,
I think you've given
absolutely.
quite a few, but
I will start with putting together a list of how you envision your brand, your service, business, whatever it is that you're working on, to look like, right? Like most of us got into this business because we wanted to make a difference. We wanted to go to bed thinking that we have changed one person's life for the better. What does that look like? Right? Like, because we tend to lose sight of that with life. It happens. You have to pay bills. You have to maybe pivot. The pandemic happened and we all have to like change and adapt. So let's go back to the initial. What is it that I envision my practice to look like or my brand to look like? What did I intend on doing? And am I doing enough? Do I feel like I could be doing enough? And then let's put together a plan. What would that look like? For you, it might be, I don't have the means or the time or the resources to go and teach classes for free somewhere else. but perhaps I can teach others to then, have more people that are aware of my systems and my protocols that can go out in the world and share in this knowledge. What else can I do? Can I talk to a big brand that may sponsor me in order for me to build, I don't know, like products that will cater to a different type of demographic? There's a million ideas. It will depend highly on what your goals are and what your capacity is. We also want to give each other grace too, right? Because the last 2 years, I call them the lost years, have been really hard for a lot of us. And if you're in the wellness industry, chances are you have encountered quite a lot of trauma, quite a lot of harm that has been exacerbated by this horrible worldwide pandemic. So your dreams and your goals and your aspirations may have changed, but at the end of the day, we're here because we want to make a difference. So let's find tiny little ways in which we can make a difference. At first, it might be just one person's life, maybe one time a week, and that's okay. And hopefully you can just evolve from there.
I have to say, I think that in some healing professions or wellness professions or medical professions, people are sort of practitioners of something, and then they treat all kinds of different things. And sometimes you don't always relate to the people you're working with really thoroughly because you're kind of treating many different things. And I think this is one of the reasons that I decided to try to target people who are struggling with something that I've already struggled with in my practice, because in some ways there's a little bit more of a relatability perspective. Like, I came from where you came from, and then I made it all the way over here, and I can help you through that process. I think that was part of why I, decided to do that, was to really be able to thoroughly understand and speak in the same language. And I can't say that I lived in an Italian American town growing up where, we ate certain foods. And my big struggle studying Ayurveda was always, I learned Ayurveda on Indian food. I learned how to be healthy on Indian food because all my teachers were Indian, were from India.
Yeah.
And so I then had to go through this process of how do I apply these principles to figure out how to mix this with the culture that I came from.
Yeah.
I grew up on Italian food, but I've not taken that next step and gone back into my culture that I came from and said, if you did this way, this would actually turn out better. Like maybe my dad wouldn't have, be in the hospital right now with diabetes complications or, all that stuff. But so going back into your roots when you've gone on a healing journey, when you've learned something, anyway, you're just sort of inspiring me to maybe go deeper into my Italian American town and do some work there.
And what a beautiful thing, right? Like, you could very easily say, okay, well, this is the way Italian Americans eat, but how about if I go back a few generations and realize that Italians eat slightly different, not a lot different, but slightly enough that this version of the food is actually healthier and better for me. And I'm going to try to bring that back to my people.
So in your book, you say that preparation is the key to success. So why is planning so important for the wellness journey, and how do you recommend that people do that?
Preparation is the key to success. If you plan, what is it that people say? Fail to plan, plan to fail. It's very true. We can be really excited, listen to a podcast and be like, I'm going to do all these things. I'm going to get the book and I'm going to do all these things. And then, you're excited for 2 or 3 days and then life happens, right? You get PMSy or whatever it might be, your problem in front of you, and then you fall off that proverbial bandwagon. So to me, I'm a list taker. I love my planning. This is one of the reasons why I tell my clients, let's sit down on the weekend and when you have a little bit of time to find the spaces and the time when you can incorporate these practices. And you need to do that every single week until you build that new habit. It'll take, on average, 21 to 28 days to build a new habit. So we need to consciously put this in writing, plan for the times and the days in which I'm going to incorporate some of these practices and be consistent. And by the way, part of planning also includes the fact that we're human and life happens. So if you fall off that bandwagon, you just, figure out what went wrong. That bandwagon going off the road might have been that you needed to change the tire, or you needed to, make an oil change. And then you get back on that bandwagon that we call life, and we keep on going. So it's also critical that we give ourselves a little bit of grace and be patient with that process, because we did not get there where we are today overnight, and we're not going to get out of it overnight.
Oh my gosh. I feel like I have so many more questions I want to talk about with you, but I always ask as the final question on the podcast, what does the wisdom of the body mean to you?
That's a beautiful question. The wisdom of the body is its ability to communicate with us. And it will make us wise as humans to learn the language of the body. It will be slightly different for you than it is for me, but our bodies are constantly talking to us, and it is up to us to find a way to understand that language so that we can live happy and whole.
Awesome. Beautiful. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And how can the audience learn more about your book and your work, Jovanka?
Yeah. So the book is available everywhere books are sold, and Reclaiming Wellness is the title. And I am available everywhere online. It's my full name and last name. So if you type in, I'm also the only brown Jovanka. It's apparently a very common name in Eastern Europe. But most likely I'm the only brown Jovanka you will ever see. So if you type in my name in Google, you'll find me everywhere on social media with my name. And I'll look forward to hearing from all of you.
I love that. That's your claim to fame. I'm the only brown Jovanka you've ever met. I love it.
Yep.
Thank you so much for being here. It's been really fun.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much, Heather.
I want to thank you for listening to this show. It brings me great pleasure to provide this content to you. I also want to let you know that I'll be making some very amazing announcements soon. And if you're not already on my email list, then I encourage you to go over to my website and subscribe to my email list so that I can keep you informed about these announcements that are going to be coming up very soon. So my website is heathergrish.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. And I look forward to getting these important announcements to you very soon and connecting. Thank you for tuning in and dropping in with us today. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. I really want to hear your feedback. To learn more about my work, visit heathergrish.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. And meet me here next time on The Wisdom of the Body.